Good morning. Welcome to Pipes and Prayers. My name is Thomas Jeffries. Today we're going to be reviewing Matthew chapter 13 and reading Matthew chapter 14. Let's get into it. Matthew chapter 13 starts off with the parable of the sower. Jesus teaches this parable or tells this parable of the sower to this crowd that is following him. Later on, he explains the parable in detail to his disciples. So the parable of the sower talks about four different locations that these seeds are planted. And so the first one is the one that's thrown along the path. And this one gets devoured by birds. And Jesus says, this is compared to someone who doesn't really understand what's being taught. They don't really understand what's in the Bible, we'll say. And so Satan's able to confuse them. We see this a lot in modern culture. People don't read the Bible for themselves. So then when someone stands up behind a pulpit and teaches them something, they don't know if it's true or not. And so you have a lot of false teachers with massive gatherings, massive followers, because they don't know that what they're teaching is false. So then the next one, the seed is cast into this rocky area. There's not very much soil there. So the plant pops up, but then when the sun comes out, it's scorched. And what Jesus is saying here is that it's kind of like someone who receives the word and gets excited, but as soon as persecution comes, as soon as hard times come, they start to fall away. Do you know somebody like that? As soon as times got tough, they turn their back on God. That's somebody who was cast into rocky soil. So the next one is cast into this thorny area. And the thorns grow up and they choke out the plant, right? What Jesus says this means is someone they maybe they hear the word, they receive the word, but they care more about worldly things, earthly things. They're more concerned about their career or their home, how nice their home is, what kind of car, what the neighbors think of them, than they are about the kingdom of heaven. You know, that person, the he with the most toys wins kind of guy who wants to have all the great things, but they forget to focus on eternity. We all know someone like that. Maybe we've been that person at sometimes. And that's what he's talking about with that one who's cast into the thorny area. And then the last one is the one that is cast into good soil. It springs up. And then what does he say? He says it bears good fruit. We keep going back to this idea that a tree will be known by its fruit. So that's the big part of Matthew chapter 13. Then we see another parable. We see several parables. We see another big parable where this master of the field plants this crop. Let's call it watermelon. And then someone comes in, an enemy, and plants a whole bunch of weeds, thistle, things like that. And so the parable talks about how he's going to go ahead and let them grow up together, and then he's going to have his harvesters come in, pull the weeds first, cast them into the fire, and then he'll harvest our watermelon. And he teaches this one again. He teaches what it means. He says, basically, at the end times, those who have grown up and are weeds, they're not part of the crop. They're not part of the kingdom, are going to be cast aside. And those who are the actual crops, the ones who have grown and are bearing that fruit that we talk about, that he'll bring those into himself, into heaven. Finally, in the last part of chapter 13, we see a couple of things. One, we see Jesus as being he's being rejected in his hometown. And this is where the saying comes, prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown or his own home. And so he's being rejected. We also see as they're rejecting him, they're saying, we know this guy, right? Like, who is this guy to teach the things he's teaching? We know who his mom and dad are, right? He was adopted by Joseph. That wasn't his real dad, but he was adopted by Joseph. Mary was his mom. We know he had brothers. And they're like, aren't his brothers with us, and aren't his sisters right here with us today? We know this guy. He's just a regular old humble carpenter. And who does he think he is to teach us like somebody with authority? So they reject him. And that's kind of how the chapter ends. So now we're going to go ahead and read chapter 14. I told you yesterday there's going to be some bad news. We're going to start off with that, with the death of John the Baptist. And then we're going to get into one of Jesus' most famous miracles where he feeds 5,000 people, plus women and children. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and start reading. Matthew chapter 14. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him." For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guest, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. And his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why do you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And when they crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all the region and brought to him all who were sick, and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. All right, so we start off with a recount of John the Baptist's death, the very beginning of chapter 14. John the Baptist had told King Herod that he was actually in sin by sleeping with his brother's wife. He had basically taken his brother's wife, as I understand it, away from him, and made her his wife, was sleeping with her. So this girl who was Herodias' daughter, this is the woman that Herod is sleeping with, Herodias' daughter, comes and does some kind of dance. We don't know what kind of dance. It says that it pleased Herod and the crowd. It quite possibly was some kind of sensual dance, but we don't know that for sure. It's kind of a speculation. But whatever it was, it pleased him so much that he was willing to offer her whatever she wanted. He made an oath. He promised, "Whatever you ask me, I'll give it to you." And so she asks for the head of John the Baptist. So Herod had put off killing John, had just incarcerated him, but he'd put off killing John because he was afraid of his followers. People saw him as a prophet, because he was, and so he didn't want to be the guy who killed this prophet. But because he promised this girl that she could have whatever she wanted, Herodias, her mom, said, "Hey, ask for John the Baptist's head." So Herod had to do it. Otherwise, he'd look like a liar and a fool, and he would lose respect. And so he had to do this thing. He had to have John the Baptist beheaded and then have that head delivered to Herodias. So this causes Jesus to kind of withdraw from that area, probably out of a lot of sorrow. Remember, this is not only this wonderful, fantastic prophet that has pointed the way to Jesus, but it's also his cousin on his mom's side. So they're family. And likely they probably spent at least some time together. Maybe not a lot, we don't know, but they're family. And so Jesus withdraws, probably out of sorrow. A crowd follows him, and he's taught them all day. It seems they're in a desolate place, meaning there's no Burger King anywhere around for them to go grab a bite to eat, and so the disciples are like, "Hey, send them home so they can go eat and rest. There's nothing for them here." But this is when Jesus performs his famous miracle, where he takes the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and he feeds this massive crowd. The Bible says there are 5,000 men plus women and children. So it's reasonable to believe that there could have been between 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people there. If you imagine that most of the men there had a wife and 2 children, and that's not a given, there could have been a lot of people there. Okay, so then Jesus, he sends his 12 disciples out to head over to Gennesaret. Jesus stays behind. He dismisses the crowds. And then he goes off to a private place to pray. We see this a lot, actually. We see this a lot where Jesus goes off to a private place to pray. We do the same thing. Nowadays, we call it a prayer closet. This would be my prayer closet, this office right here. I can close the door. I can pray. I usually sit in that chair and pray and read my Bible, and I can spend a long time in here and just get along with God. Jesus does this a lot. I think we see this as an example being taught in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, instead of heaping up big fancy words so that all men can hear, just go into your private room and pray to your Father who hears you in secret. So then the disciples they're on the water in this boat, and they're just getting hammered. I mean, they're just getting bashed by this storm. And they're probably panicking, nervous, says there's headwinds, means they're not making the progress that they would like to be making. They don't have a motorized boat, so they're relying on their sails to get them across to where they need to go. And then Jesus comes up. In Mark, it says that Jesus meant to pass by him, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit when we get to the book of Mark. It says that he intended to kind of pass by them, but they see him, they think he's a ghost, and they're a little bit nervous. But then Jesus says, "Hey, listen, it's me. Calm down, guys. It's me." Peter says, "Hey, if it's really you, call me out here so I can walk on the water." We've all heard this story. If we've been in church for any amount of time, Jesus walks on the water, and Peter comes out of the boat to walk on the water with Jesus. And what happens? We see Peter gets out. He's doing fine. Then all of a sudden, he takes his eyes off of Jesus, starts looking at his circumstances, gets nervous, and starts to sink. We do the same thing in our lives, don't we? We take our eyes off of Jesus, we see our circumstances, and we start to flounder in our life. I can give you an example from my life that happened to my wife and I recently. We were kind of put in a position where we had to leave our home that was attached to a job that we had with the church, and there were some things going on with the leadership of the church that we didn't agree with. We tried to work through those things, and the leadership didn't want to address those issues, and so we felt like we needed to step down. We couldn't support the leadership, and so our job there at the church, part of that compensation, a big part of that compensation, was a home to live in. So we stepped down, and a friend of ours invited us to come stay with her for the winter while we saved up money to get a house. And then that friend decided she didn't like having roommates, and so very abruptly she decided she wanted us to move out. And so here we are. It felt like we were being kicked while we were down, and for a moment I kind of took my eyes off of Jesus. I didn't stop having faith in him or anything like that, but I really started looking at my circumstances and, why is this happening? And God, did we do something wrong, or did we make a mistake with this decision, or are you mad at us? Like, what's going on here? And we started kind of, oh, poor pitiful me, and took our eyes off of Jesus. We looked at the storm. We focused on the storm instead of Jesus. And when we put our eyes back on Jesus and trusted him and said, you know what, whatever happens, things worked out. And so flash forward, here we are. My wife and I were fine. God took care of us. We have a beautiful home. Things are going really well. But we had to go through that low period, just like Peter did, so that God could remind us that we desperately need him in everything that we do. We desperately need God. And we do. And so now we remind ourselves constantly, and we thank God all the time, even though things are going really well now, and we're on what you might call the mountaintop now, we still desperately need God for everything we do. And if we can keep that in mind, if we can always think like, listen, I desperately need God, even to make my breakfast, to take a breath, whatever I'm doing, I desperately need God. I need his strength. I need his will. I need his guidance. Then when those hard times come and we're still in that mindset, we still have our eyes on Jesus, we'll be okay. We're not going to sink. And so we're thankful for that season of our life that was horrible in the moment, but it made us even stronger, and it made us even more dependent on God, and it brought us even closer together to each other and to God. It was a wonderful season, stung in the moment, and I hope that you'll find comfort in that too. If you're going through a season that's just like, God, what is going on? What are you doing right now? Like, what's your plan? Have you forsaken me? Have you forgotten about me? Just remember, God has a plan. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full into his wonderful face, and the things of this earth will grow strangely dim. Things will start to like seem insignificant compared to the big picture if you keep your eyes on Jesus. All right, so then this chapter finishes up with he gets into the boat with Peter. They hop back in the boat. Sometimes I kind of picture, and this is just silly, but like a Chinese fire drill where, Peter gets out of the boat, runs around the outside of it, and then gets back in. It's not what happened, but sometimes my ADD mind goes there. So they get back into the boat, and Jesus calms the storm, and then they're like, wow, truly this is the Son of God. What a testimony, right? Finishes up by Jesus going to Gennesaret with his disciples, and when he gets there, people recognize him, and they start telling everyone, like, hey, bring Bob over here. He's been sick. This guy right here can heal. And so they bring all their sick, and Jesus heals all their sick, and that's how chapter 14 ends. Tomorrow we're going to read chapter 15. We're going to talk about traditions versus commandments. There's some stuff to talk about right there, right? We'll talk about what defiles a person. We'll talk about more healings. And we're actually going to hit a passage that can actually be a little controversial, where Jesus calls a woman a dog. And we're going to talk about what that means. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for calming the storms in our lives. Thank you so much that you've reached out your hand. You've told us to come to you. And if we can just keep our eyes on you and not focus so much on the circumstances around us, we know that we can get through those circumstances. Like Paul said, he's been on the mountaintop and he's been in the valley. He's been high, he's been low. He's been hungry, he's been full. But he can do all things through you, Jesus, who gives him strength. And so, Father, help us to keep our eyes on you. Help us to focus on your plan for our lives. Help us to consistently live our life in a way that shows gratitude for the sacrifice that you made, shows gratitude for the salvation that you provided. Thank you. Thank you for what you've given us. Father, thank you for the hard times that I've gone through, and thank you for the good times that I've gone through. And those hard times make us even more appreciative of the good times. So, Father, thank you for that as well. Right now, I lift up thinking about persecution and those seeds that are thrown into the rocky soil. I lift up all of the Christians in Nigeria and Uganda and other places around the world who are being persecuted, tortured, and murdered for their faith in you. And I ask that they would be rooted in you, and that whatever happens, whatever they have to endure, that they would do it knowing that to live as Christ, to die as gain, that to be absent from the body would be to be present with you. And so whether they're here on earth living their life for you, or whether they end up coming home to be embraced by you in person, it's all for your glory. And so encourage them, give them peace. Father, if it's your plan, and if it's your will, provide them salvation here on earth from being physically hurt. Pray for a revival around the world, that Christians would stand up to injustice, that they would stand up to evil, that they would stand up to sin, and that we would just be hard-lined against the things that you are against. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, tomorrow, Matthew chapter 15. See you there.